Commander Precon decks are a great way to dive into the format, giving you a complete, ready-to-play deck right out of the box. They're a great tool to gain insight on how you can begin building a Commander deck if you've never built one before, and many offer new and exciting strategies with each new set release. Once you've played your new deck a few times, you'll likely want to upgrade the deck. Refine it, tweak it, make it more unique to you and your playstyle. In this series, we'll be taking a look at each of the Commander Precon decks, taking a deep dive into the nitty-gritty and examining which cards work, which cards are duds, and which new cards you should look into adding in from your collection. My name's Flynn, and welcome to the Commander Precon Upgrade Guide, Bloomburrow Edition. In this video, we'll be discussing Squirreled Away, a kindred squirrel deck that aims to make an army of squirrels, make food, and then make use of all of that foraging for value. Quite literally, as this deck also features one of the main set mechanics from Bloomburrow, Forage. When you forage, you exile 3 cards from your graveyard, or sacrifice a food. This can be done as part of a cost, or as an activated ability, giving us a number of applications to this mechanic. This is the ability specific to the squirrel creatures in this set, and this added relevance given to food as a card subtype will be important later on, but for now I'd like to take a look at our main commanders. Meet Hazel of the Root Bloom, a 3/5 squirrel druid for 2, a black and a green. She has 2 main abilities. You can tap her, pay 2 life, and tap X untapped tokens you control to add X mana of any combination of colors. And at the beginning of your end step, you create a token that's a copy of a target token you control. And if that token is a squirrel, you create 2 token copies instead. Hazel is interesting as a squirrel legend. To make a quick aside before we begin, Chatterfang, Squirrel General, has been a tough nut to crack out of the command zone, given that he acts as a token doubler and a combo enabler on many fronts. For this reason, Chatterfang is still and likely will remain a very popular commander for a squirrel deck. Hazel, on the other hand, offers us some token production, but gives us token copies of our already existing tokens rather than just simply making squirrels. This can offer us some unique synergies depending on the type of tokens we can generate. There are some high-value token generators that can make some powerful tokens. Having the ability to copy those tokens can be of tremendous value. The only downside to this is you do need to have some form of token production to get the ball rolling. Honing in on her other abilities, she turns your tokens into mana dorks, letting you tap her along with some tokens you control to generate mana of any color. One of my favorite cards from my personal squirrel deck has been Jaheira, Friend of the Forest, who allows all of our tokens, creature or non-creature, to tap for a green. This gives us additional redundancy, and quite possibly it might outclass Jaheira by giving us more color fixing potential. This also will present less of a threat than Chatterfang, whose presence at the table will raise alarms, given his combo potential, even at the lower power levels. If you have leftover food tokens sitting in play otherwise not doing much, you can use them with this as mana rocks. And once again, I really enjoy that we've been seeing food tokens being used in ways other than their intended purpose. But remember kids, don't play with your food. Our next commander is the Odd Acorn Gang, a 5/5 squirrel warrior for 3, a black and a green with menace, trample, and reach. Squirrels you control have tap, target squirrel gets +2/+2 until the end of turn, activate only as a sorcery. Whenever 1 or more squirrels you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. This card is quite an essay. For starters, on its own, it's a powerful threat in combat. 5/5 with a nice seasoning of keywords makes it something that you'd want to regularly turn sideways and swing with. It also gives your other squirrels the ability to tap for the sake of pumping up another squirrel. A great idea would be to power up the Odd Acorn Gang, as they have both Trample and Menace, and so as your commander, we do have the option at our disposal for a commander damage win. It's a bit rare these days to see a deck able to pivot into a game plan such as this, but on top of that we have card draw tacked on. You'd only ever draw 1 card per combat, but that's still value to be had. This is a bit more of an aggressive approach to a squirrel deck instead of the combo engines that this deck generally leads into. Lastly, since we've already mentioned his name 3 times, Chatterfang Squirrel General is reprinted in this deck, and is a powerful 3/2 squirrel warrior for 2 and a green. He has Forest Walk, and whenever you create 1 or more tokens, you'll create that many squirrel tokens as well. You can also pay 1 black and sacrifice X squirrels to give a target creature +X/-X until the end of turn. Chatterfang is my signature commander and is a powerful combo engine of a deck. Any token that you make comes with a squirrel friend while Chatterfang is in play, giving you a doubling season style effect that will get out of hand quickly. Now, because of this high ceiling, Chatterfang has for a long time been the go-to commander, basically since his release. So while it can be swapped out to be the lead commander of this deck to quite some substantial success, in order to give our new furry friends some time in the spotlight, we're actually going to keep Chatterfang as just part of the 99 in this video. So the goal of this deck is to make tokens, both creature and non-creature tokens, and utilize them for value. Our face commander really does indicate how heavily we're leaning into this strategy, as we're going to be using our tokens to produce mana. This will give us an explosive amount of mana that can snowball into some really big turns. We have a handful of brand new cards in this deck, some of which offer us a tremendous amount of value. In this next section, we'll discuss some of the better ones that should likely remain in your deck as you upgrade your build. Hazel's Brewmaster is a 3/4 Squirrel Warlock for 3 and a black with Menace. Whenever Hazel's Brewmaster enters or attacks, you may exile up to one target card from a graveyard and create a food token. Foods you control have all activated abilities of all creature cards exiled with the Broodmaster. This card is perhaps the strongest new Squirrel in the deck. So for starters, you get Grave Hate on a creature on an enter ability, and this also produces food tokens. Beyond that, your food tokens gain the activated abilities of the creatures exiled with this ability. One of my favorite cards and combo engines is Necrotic Ooze, as it adopts all of the activated abilities of creatures in graveyards, letting you build up some unique combo synergies. This is something very similar, though you have to exile them with the Brewmaster. But that being said, this is still incredibly strong, as every food token you control has all of those abilities. If your opponent has some spicy spice in their graveyard, Hazel's Brewmaster can add them to the stew, so to speak. This leaves a lot of open-endedness to the combo palooza, and you can even stack your graveyard full of powerful activated abilities, so you can take advantage of this with your food tokens. You can also make for some powerful combo synergies since the food tokens are not considered creatures, and so if you give them activated abilities that do things such as put -1/-1 counters on them, you can still do that, but because they're not considered creatures, they will not die from excess counters. Swarmyard Massacre is 3 and 2 black for a sorcery. You'll create 2 1/1 squirrel tokens, and then each creature that isn't an insect, rat, spider, or squirrel gets -1/-1 until the end of turn for each creature you control that is an insect, rat, spider, or squirrel. Finally, an on-theme wrath effect for squirrels. Unless an opponent is running a deck that has a lot of those creature types specifically, they'll likely lose their entire board state to this, as we will likely have quite the large field of squirrels. At the very minimum, you'll be giving creatures not of those types -2/-2, since you create the 2 token squirrels first, and so this does scale rather nicely the longer the game goes on, and it works well even if you've been recently wrath. Scurry of Squirrels is 2/2 for 3 and 1 green with 2 separate myriad triggers. Whenever the Scurry deals combat damage to a player, you'll put +1/+1 counter onto a target creature you control. This is a fun card. For starters, each of those myriad abilities triggers separately. Myriad is an attack trigger, giving you a token copy of the Scurry Squirrels for each opponent that's not the defending player that is also tapped and attacking that opponent. Basically, you get a Scurry Squirrels to attack each opponent that you're not already attacking. But in this case, you'll get 2 copies of the Scurry attacking, which can make for some fun maths. In a 4-player game, you'll actually create 2 tokens for each opponent, giving you 6 tokens, and if they connect, you'll get up to 6 +1/+1 counters to hand out. Sword of the Squeak is a 2-mana artifact equipment. It has Equip 2. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each other creature you control with base power or toughness 1. Whenever a hamster, mouse, rat, or squirrel enters, you may attach Sword of the Squeak to that creature. First off, I love this card. This can give a huge power boost to a tiny creature, and what makes this unique is that it's only looking for the base power and toughness to be 1. Rat colony decks, token decks, all will want to utilize this card, as it'll give a coat of arms style effect to the creature. You can equip this to the odd acorn gang to make it tremendous before swinging into threatened life totals. In this next section, we'll discuss some of the better reprints included in this deck. These are the cards that you'll also likely want to keep in the deck, as they'll offer you the best head start in building up your Squirrel deck. Academy Manufactor is an amazing token producer for decks that want to make artifact tokens. Whenever you would create a token that's either a food, a treasure, or a clue, you instead will make one of each. There is a lot of added value for this deck, as you'll be making extra tokens to use for your various sack outlets. Beastmaster Ascension is one of our deck's easiest win conditions. Getting up to 7 quest counters is no sweat in a deck that hemorrhages creature tokens. The return is immediate. You swing in with 7 creatures and immediately give your entire board +5/+5, which could easily end games on the spot. Chatterfang, Squirrel General, is a card that we've already discussed in this video. He's a phenomenal Squirrel Commander option. He offers us a huge amount of token producing synergy. Making a Squirrel token every time we make any kind of token is a huge benefit to our strategy. Chitter Spitter is an all-star in my Squirrel deck, being an Anthem ability that scales as the game goes on. For 3 mana, you get an artifact with 3 abilities. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you may sacrifice a token, and if you do, you put an acorn counter on Chitter Spitter. Squirrels you control get +1/+1 for each acorn counter on Chitter Spitter. Lastly, you can pay 1 green and tap it to create a 1/1 green squirrel. I like to build this up gradually, sacrificing a spared squirrel token at my upkeep to bulk up the acorn counter count. Then I make a new token that comes out just a little bit larger than the others. Because you can sacrifice any kind of token, you have a great deal of flexibility in what you can use as the Chitter Spitter fodder. Ravenous Squirrel is a neat outlet to sacrifice those tokens, giving us a draw engine and a larger squirrel that grows larger. This can be great if you want to lean into the aristocrat strategy. Tusky, Bearer of Secrets, is the ultimate card draw engine, giving us a card draw whenever a creature deals combat damage to an opponent. This does trigger individually for each creature, so unlike other draw engines, we can draw multiple cards off of our army swinging in. He's also indestructible and uncounterable, making him a very potent card to drop as we begin establishing our board state. So you've played the deck a number of times and are wanting to upgrade your list so it flows better and works better for your playstyle. We want to maintain the deck's original game plan, and so while you can take this deck in an entirely different direction, we're going to keep the main strategy the same while upgrading the deck. We'll be adding in 15 cards and removing 15 cards. And while we're not going to worry about the mana base in this deck, our main focus is the spell package. For your convenience, in the description below, we'll have a link to the Moxfield list with all the cards we discuss here. Starting off, we have Bone Cache Overseer, a 1 mana Squirrel Warlock with 1 activated ability. You can tap it and pay 1 life to draw a card. You can only activate this ability if 3 or more cards left your graveyard this turn, or if you've sacrificed a food token. This is pretty accessible card draw. Given how many cards in this deck utilize food tokens as a resource, this should be a shoo-in. Camellia the Seed Miser is a 3 mana Squirrel Warlock with Menace. Other squirrels you control have Menace. Whenever you sacrifice 1 or more foods, you create a 1/1 squirrel. Lastly, you can pay 2 and Forage to put a +1/+1 counter onto each other squirrel you control. Forage is the new set mechanic from Bloomburrow and is thematic to the squirrel creatures of the set. To forage, you can either exile 3 cards from your graveyard or sacrifice a food. This can be a great way to help bulk up your squirrels, making them larger, and because you're giving them menace, you'll make them harder to block, and so Camellia can easily snowball into a game-ending engine. Cauldron Familiar is a very popular food support card, as we can sacrifice a food to reanimate the cat, and then when it enters, each opponent loses 1 life and we gain 1 life. I didn't include it in this deck's upgrade, but Yigra, Eater of All from the main set, does turn all creatures except itself into food, and so this can combo out very easily with the Cauldron Familiar. Collector's Vault is one of my favorite artifacts. It costs 2 mana, and for 2 mana you can tap the vault to draw a card, discard a card, and then create a treasure token. This is very helpful to begin drawing through your deck, not to mention the discard can help set up your graveyard for later, and of course treasure is always helpful. Drakekeeper is perhaps the only Squirrel Lord I would add in, and is a 5 mana elf druid. When it enters, you create 2 squirrels. You can pay 3 and 1 black to give squirrels you control +1/+0 and menace until the end of turn. This gives us squirrel tokens, and while we do have other ways to give menace to our squirrels, this also offers us repeatable buffs, making our squirrel army stronger and just generally harder to block. Marionette Apprentice is a 1/2 human artificer for 2 with Fabricate 1. It can either enter with a +1/+1 counter on it, or you can create a 1/1 colorless servo creature token. Whenever another artifact or creature you control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life. This card is bonkers in this deck, and you'll likely be sacrificing many artifacts and creatures, and depending on how wide your board is grown, this could transform into a win condition on its own. The deck already runs Zulaport Cutthroat, and while you can add in other aristocrat effects, I think this one has the most synergy with this deck, giving us triggers off of our food and treasure tokens, and of course our creatures. Mirkwood Bats is a 2/3 bat with flying for 3 and 1 black. Whenever you create or sacrifice a token, each opponent loses 1 life. And this falls along the same lines as the Marionette Apprentice, though this gives us a slightly different condition, and it gives us a trigger upon us creating tokens. And if we have both out, we can actually do quite a bit of damage without even entering combat. Knight of the Sweet's Revenge is one of my favorite food synergy cards. For 4 mana, you get an enchantment with 3 abilities. When it enters, you create a food. Foods you control can tap for 1 green. Lastly, you can pay 7 mana, sacrifice the Knight, and give creatures you control +X until the end of turn, where X is the number of foods you control, but you can only activate this as a sorcery. This is, in a way, an on-theme Craterhoof behemoth. Combining this with the cards that grant Menace or Trample, and you can deal a ton of damage very easily. Peregrine Took is a 2/3 halfling citizen for 3 mana with 2 relevant abilities. Whenever you make a number of tokens, you make those tokens plus 1 additional food token. You can also sacrifice 3 foods to draw a card. This gives us draw off of our food tokens. If we've given them a huge power buff from something like the aforementioned Knight of Sweet's Revenge, we can then sacrifice those foods to draw us a few cards to help finish off. Provisions Merchant is another great way to use our foods to win. When it enters, you make a food. Whenever it attacks, you can sacrifice a food, and if you do, attacking creatures get +1/+1 and trample into the end of turn. This is great to use on the back of the menace granting abilities of our other cards, as this will make it easier to get that damage through. Savvy Hunter is a solid engine to create food tokens, both on attack and on blocking, and similar to Peregrine Took, we can sacrifice 2 foods to draw a card. Scavenger's Talent is a 1 mana class enchantment with 3 levels. On base level, whenever 1 or more creatures you control would die, you create a food token. This ability only triggers once per turn. You can pay 2 to level it up, at which point it gains. Whenever you sacrifice a permanent, target player mills 2 cards. For 3 mana, it goes to level 2, where at the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice 3 other non-land permanents, and if you do, return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it. This gives us another source of food, which can eventually be used to reanimate some of our cards. We don't utilize a ton of the forage mechanic in this deck, but if you do choose to lean into that strategy, this is a great tool to assist. Thornvault Forager is a 2/2 ranger squirrel for 1 and 1 green. This creature has 3 abilities. You can tap the Forager to add a green. You can tap it and forage to add 2 mana in any combination of colors. Lastly, you can pay 3 and 1 green and tap it to add any squirrel card from your deck to your hand. We have ourselves an in-type tutor that can easily tutor for any squirrel to suit our current game context. Tough Cookie is a pet card of mine, being a 2/2 for 2 that's also a food. When it enters, you create a food. You can also pay 3 to make a target non-creature artifact you control into a 4/4 artifact creature until the end of turn. You can also pay 2, tap and sack the cookie to gain free life. This gives us technically 2 food permanents in play, and we can use the excess mana to turn our non-creature foods into creatures for a turn. Valley Rockcaller is a 1/3 Squirrel Warlock with Menace for 1 and 1 black. Whenever it attacks, each opponent loses X life, and you gain X life, where X is the number of other squirrels, bats, lizards, and rats you control. This can be converted into a win condition easily, as our squirrel tokens can easily swarm the battlefield, and with the Rockcaller's attack trigger, we don't even have to attack with our other squirrels to do damage to our opponents. In fact, with this in play, it's actually more advantageous to hold back our other squirrels while the Rockcaller attacks alone, because it has Menace and it has to be blocked by at least 2 creatures by the defending player, and while that doesn't really matter in the scope of its ability going off, it does become a question of choosing the correct player to attack. Now, we do have to make room for these cards. In the spirit of lowering our mana curve, removing the cards that don't quite synergize as nicely as we'd like, these cards are my recommendations to cut from your list. If in your gameplay and testing you find that some of these do work better than others, feel free to keep them in and remove the cards that don't suit your playstyle. I think that this deck is a great entryway into Commander, giving you a ton of cards critical to building your own Squirrel deck. There are a lot of routes that you can take with this deck, from a basic token strategy, to an aristocrat deck, to a combo deck, and we even have Volptions for Voltron strategies. At the end of the day, how you develop your deck is up to you, but for now, that will wrap up our look at Squirreled Away. What do you think of this deck? Are there some fun tech cards that you'll be slotting into your build? Let's talk about it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, likes and shares are the best way to help this channel's community grow. If you're new here, subscribe and ring the bell to not miss out on future videos. And as always, I appreciate you hanging out with me today, and I'll catch you all next time.